Hey, I'm Cal, and you're listening to the Playing with Power podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things CEDH, EDH, and Magic the Gathering. Now, let's start by showcasing our fighters this evening. Today, I am joined by Ryan.
Hey guys, how's it going? It's me again. It's like you can't get rid of me. I'm like a rash that you keep applying the topical cream to. Here I am.
Ryan, what are we going to be talking about today?
All right, so today we're going to be talking about the sets and the cards for CEDH in 2022. So, any standout cards, new strategies, the sets they came from, and much, much more.
Excellent. But first, let's talk about Patreon really quick. If you want to support Playing with Power while also getting great perks, Patreon is the place to go. For the price of a coffee every month, you can see our videos early. We've also just introduced plenty of new perks, including a merch bundle tier, exclusive gameplay content for certain tiers, and more. Check out the links in the podcast description for more information. So without further ado, let's talk about CEDH in 2022. We wanted to start off with the real money, the cards of this year. I'm sure everybody knows there was a lot of sets that came out, a lot of commander decks that came out. We just wanted to look with a little bit of hindsight back on kind of the biggest sets. Usually the premium sets is most of what we have here, the stuff that went into standard. Of course, we're going to talk about Commander Legends Baldur's Gate. We just have a couple different cards that we wanted to chat about from each of those sets. And we are starting off with the first premium set of the year, Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. It was great to go back to Kamigawa. Loved what they did with the place. And there is a lot of awesome cards for CEDH contained within. Ryan, what stands out to you first from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty?
One of the first things about Kamigawa Neon Dynasty was, number one, the flavor. It was so cool to see things like ninjas and stuff like that. I think they handled it so well. How are we going to go back to this, feudal Japan kind of, or this Oriental themed set without it just being Kamigawa again? Because Kamigawa, in hindsight, was regarded really highly from like a historical, it's one of my favorite sets of all time kind of thing. But when it first came out, it actually didn't do super well. Wasn't received super well. And they just did such a great job in putting that theme and that flavor in there. And that whole set was a blast to play. From a CEDH perspective, we saw actually some of the most pivotal cards, I would say, that we saw from CEDH in Kamigawa. I would even go so far, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but most of the really great cards, not all of them, of course, but most of them actually came out of kind of the first part of this year. We'll get into it a little bit more in more detail later. But I guess we'll start off with some of the bigger hitters, if you will, that came out of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. I would say pretty much the channel lands kind of take the top spot of what is the most impactful thing for CEDH in Kamigawa. I would say it was all the channel lands. Almost every single one of them sees play. Or actually, I take that back. Every single one of them sees play in some CEDH deck. I haven't seen mono black decks playing the black one.
Yeah, channel lands, you could probably go off and say that as far as cards printed this year, they're probably the single most impactful cycle. Boseiju and Odawara especially have kind of thrown some decks on their heads. They've made stacks worse almost single-handedly. Boseiju, of course, being a green land that you can cycle and it will channel. You can channel it. That's different for reasons. It doesn't draw you a card. You can channel Boseiju to naturalize something, destroy an artifact or enchantment, and then or a land even, which is sometimes relevant. And then the controller gets to go up and search up a land from their deck, put it onto the battlefield. Cool. And then Odawara, of course, is a blue legendary land that you can channel and bounce a creature back to its controller's hand. So you can use it on your own stuff. You can use it on your opponent's stuff. Both of those very flexible. And then the other one's a lot more niche. The white one, deal damage to an attacking or a blocking creature.
Yeah,
sure.
Kill target Crom. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. It deals 4 damage, which is pretty much kills every single relevant creature in the format that you're not automatically losing the game to. The red one makes some dudes that like exile themselves at the end of the turn. Like classic, right? I know Winota plays it, I think, just in case TM, if you're desperate, you can channel it, get some Winota activations. What does the black one do?
It's the one that mills and returns a creature. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I can see that being playable. But yeah, channel lands, massive impact You can easily slot them in because they're just lands that tap for the, Boseiju is just a land that comes in untapped and taps for green. Otawara is a land that just comes in untapped and taps for blue. And then incidentally, they have these crazily powerful activated abilities that you can use them through Abolisher, et cetera, et cetera. They're pretty wild.
And I think that's really the key. What makes these things so great was the fact that it really offered new strategies more than just a piece of removal. These kind of harken back a little bit to the MDFCs, the modal dual double face cards or whatever. People will ask, "Hey, why do you have Shatter Skull Smashing in here? Lightning Bolt's just better." And it's because Shatter Skull Smashing has zero opportunity cost of putting in your deck. It's a land slot, and these are the same thing. The Beseiju, the Ottawaras, these have zero opportunity cost in your deck. You can put them in as land, or you can channel them to get that key interaction piece at the right time. Somebody does a Hulk line and has a Grand Abolisher. Oh, now I'm locked out of the game, or they do something else, like maybe they Gilded Drake one, or maybe they reanimate one, and you're like, oh, well, now I can't do anything. Well, on somebody's breach turn, that's actually not the case anymore because now we have Beseiju. And so some people just kind of resign themselves to the game being over. But the green deck says, no, no, no. I'm a Thrasios player. I have a Ristic Study out. I'm going to continue to draw cards because I'm going to be able to get you if I can draw a Beseiju. So it's still opened up things to us that where we're kind of previously locked out before, like the Rule of Law decks, like you mentioned, and things like Grand Abolisher. These types of things were not just game-ending silver bullets that just said, game over now, and are we good to scoop? Be like, no, we have channel lands now. We can still interact in this game. Huge impact on the format. Absolutely love those lands. They're basically auto-includes in every deck.
Yep. Oh, I apologize. I said that Otawara only bounced creatures. It can bounce artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or planeswalkers. Of course, it costs 4, and Boseiju costs 2 to activate, but also a very relevant line of text on these lands for all of us CDH players is that the ability on all of the lands costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. So if you have a commander, Boseiju will always cost a single green. If you have a single commander out, which many decks will only have, Otawara will cost you 3. But if you have both of your partners out, Otawara will cost 2. Partners stay winning once again.
Yep, every time. And their channel abilities. So it's an activated ability from your hand. So it circumvents things like your Phyrexian Revokers and stuff like that, because those only pertain to things on the battlefield. And they're not a spell cast, so it gets around counter magic and stuff like that. I mean, you have literally Stifle, and that's the only thing that you can do to really try and stop these things.
And since it's an activated ability of a land, it gets around Grand Abolisher, because Grand Abolisher only stops artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. They didn't think about lands on that one, I guess.
I mean, also at the same time, it didn't matter if it said lands because it's from your hand.
So true.
Yep.
So true, bestie.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not a permanent at that time. Anyways, moving on from the channel lands, I'm sure we could talk about the channel lands for forever, because they have really minutely changed not minutely, but they've pushed the landscape of CDH along. I always personally love more interaction, so love to see the channel lands. Moving past the channel lands, there are a few interesting commanders that people have played coming out of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. Of course, probably the most common one you've seen is probably Shorakai Genesis Engine. A lot of people, including myself, really latched onto that deck because it offered something new and unique for a strategy, for a commander-based strategy for the first time in a minute. You get to play a commander that isn't actually a creature, that makes polymorph targets, and you can just play Humility and not care because your commander still works, and you don't play any creatures except for Tidespout, Tyrant, and Hullbreaker Horror that just end the game. So that was an interesting card that came out. It's fallen off the radar a little bit because people realized that it was still a blue-white deck that struggled to win, even though it was a great polymorph commander. Because blue and white struggle to tutor for win conditions still to this day. And then the Legendary Cycle of Dragons was in there. And of course, there's AO, the Dawn Sky. However you pronounce that. Ryan, how do you pronounce that card?
It's pronounced Owl.
Ow!
I had a lot of discussion. Actually, some people said it's pronounced it's pronounced Owl. We're just gonna stop there. It's better this way. Owl the Dawn Sky.
Ow. Okay. Ow, the Dawn Sky, of course, was in there. And then there was the Red Dragon. Do you remember that Red Dragon's
Atsushi the
name?
Blazing
Etsushi,
Sky.
the Blazing Sky. Both of those commanders have made appearances on our channel at least once. And they have a pretty interesting and unique strategies to them that people have loved to dig into. Moving past the commanders, um, there was another cycle that has had a pretty big impact. Two of them more so than the rest of them. There is the March cycle. Ryan, what is in the March cycle?
Specifically, the March cycle is a cycle where you can exile a card of a certain color, and it will reduce its X cost by 2. And the kind of the pivotal ones was the March of Swirling Mist and the March of Otherworldly Light. Both of those allowed you to, get that at that pivotal time to be able to exile a certain thing or phase out a certain thing that was stopping you from going off. And if there was a pivotal moment in the game when somebody was about to win and they needed a creature to do it, or if they were about to do something with like Underworld Breach or something like that, you could use one of the marches to be able to do that. Now, March of Swirling Mists was the blue one. That's the one that allows you to phase out, which was so amazing, by the way. I love that they did phasing and not like flicker or exile or bounce. I love the phasing one the most because there's no ATB, there's no LTB, there's no getting it back from a graveyard or returning it to the command zone. It's stuck there in its little, and it's whatever. I can't think this early in the morning. So
Yeah, March of Swirling Mist. You get
yeah.
it's an X and a blue. You get to, as you alluded to, exile some blue cards from your hand if you want to. Automatically, if you exile a blue card, it's just X is 2 right there,
X is 2.
all on
Yeah.
its own. Or you can pay for it the old-fashioned way with like your mana and stuff. I don't really know if we do that, but and then it's up to X target creatures faces out. This is yet another card that incidentally kind of made Stacks decks a little bit worse this year. When your opponent can be sandbagging a March of Swirling Mist and then like on somebody else's end step, just phase out your Dranith and phase out your Collector Oof or whatever like creature based stacks piece is stopping them, and then they get to untap, attempt to do their thing, and then the turn just like goes back to you around as the stacks player. Even if like they don't win the game, it's very safe play for them to do because it just goes back around to you as the stacks player, and your stacks pieces phase back in, and like probably no other player or maybe one other player got out of being affected by the stacks pieces. It's not like you blew up the Draenith Magistrate. You just like remove it very temporarily for your own purposes and then get to try to play the game normally, right?
Yeah. I think Draenith was a really good example for that too, because you're like, well, I have a commander-centric strategy, and so what I need to do is I need to get these commanders on the battlefield, and I don't want other people's commander-centric strategies to also be going off. So I'll use March of Swirling Mist, phase it out, go to my turn, cast those, and then all of a sudden, not everyone, depending on turn order, is able to also do the same thing. So it really, really hosed asymmetrical strategies, which was super great. Because obviously the ones that were symmetrical, those decks played to those strengths. And the asymmetrical one said, well, so long as it's not affecting me, it's not a big problem. And just the idea that we can get rid of these temporarily was really, really great. Like you said, it made stacks worse this year.
And then, of course, there was also March of Otherworldly Light, which you mentioned, which is the white march. Same way, you can discount the X in a single white by 2 by exiling white cards from your hand. And then a lot less flexible, definitely a lot more of a traditional white card kind of effect. Exile an artifact, creature, or enchantment with mana value X or less. So it's a permanent solution. It can be kind of a pricey way to get rid of things, but it's a flexible way to get rid of things.
Yeah, if somebody's about to combo off with the dockside, I would trade 2 cards to make sure they never get their dockside back. And so March of Otherworldly Light definitely still sees play. Maybe not so much as Swirling Mist in a card for card, number per number fashion, but it's still a super flexible card because the only thing you need to do with the marches is hold up 1 white or 1 blue. And those are powerful effects.
For sure. Of course, we mentioned the whole March cycle, but the rest of the March cycle isn't really played. There's a red one that lets you exile stuff, and you can like play 2 of them until the end of your next turn. I know Prosper plays that. Very specifically applicable to Prosper, nothing else. March of Wretched Sorrow is also a kind of removal piece. It does X damage to target creature or planeswalker, and you gain X life. a lot less relevant in CDH. I don't know if I've ever seen it in a list. And then the green one is like actually unplayable in EDH in general. You get to choose a creature with mana value less than X and search your library for a creature card with the same name and put it onto the battlefield. So since it cares about creatures of the same name, we're not playing that one in EDH.
Yeah.
Check out my Golgari Shadowborn Apostle deck, where I can get a second Shadowborn Apostle. Isn't that cool?
Wow, it only
Anyways,
cost you 2 cards to do it.
yep, exactly. And I just mentioned with the Red March, March of Otherworld, not Otherworldly Light, Reckless Joy. It's kind of a one-off card that is quite good in one specific CDH deck. We did see a lot of that out of Kamigawa in specific. Obviously, lots of new ninjas with cool abilities in ninjutsu for Yuriko. Yuriko got a lot of creatures that it actually wants to play now, rather than cards that it kind of has to play. So Yuriko got some cool new toys to play with. And
Yeah,
then there
I
was
think I think Yuriko. I love it when sets come out that actually will say one deck is going to get a huge boon, and this is usually decks that revolve around like a tribal theme or something to that effect. So if there was ever a set that came out that had a heavy dwarf sub theme to it, that would be a boon for Magda. So consequently, Kamigawa had a ton of ninjas in it because that's what Kamigawa originally had. And so now suddenly Yuriko had tons of toys to play with, not only from a casual perspective, but a CEDH one too. And there's some powerful cards for Yuriko in this set.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And then moving past the ninjas as well, there was kind of a lot of random other one-offs that I'm just gonna spin through really quick that we wrote down here. Ruthless Technomancer, pretty good in sacrifice strategies, specifically black Dargo decks. Really enjoyed this. It made some lines better. It gives you treasures, I think. That's pretty slick. There was Nashi, Moon Sage's Scion, another ninja, which is like played in Yuriko, but a few decks that like kind of mid-rangey, grindy decks that are looking for more card advantage, or that also care about exiling cards like Prosper does, have picked up Nashi, Moon Sage's Scion. And then out of the Kamigawa Commander decks, alongside Shorikai, there was also Imposter Mech, which is another cool clone effect that you can kind of do cool stuff with. Was there any other one-off cards that popped out for you, Brian?
No, those are pretty much it. I definitely want to make a mention to Imposter Mech. It was a very, very cool card because it was a vehicle, and so it's a non-creature. So those that cared about non-creature spells, especially things like Elsha, could suddenly cast a clone at instant speed off the top of its library. That's really cool effect. People slept on that for a couple months, but then they eventually said, "Hey, wow, this actually has some legs to it."
And then, of course, I want to give an honorary mention for a card from in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty that I don't know if a single person in CEDH cast this year, but it might have been the most said card in CEDH this year. That is, "You Are Already Dead." Lots of people like to name that off their demonic consultation. Very funny to get another silly little demonic consultation name.
Yep.
But moving on to another shockingly CEDH impacting set from this year, Streets of New Capenna, a new world with a cool kind of mob families theme. Another, is it wedge set? Is this the wedges?
It was the shards. It had
Yeah,
shards.
shows what I know. I can never get those two straight. We've got shards, a shard set. Always love a 3-color set. It always brings some cool stuff to play with, and especially these commanders. I'm going to start off talking about some of the more impactful commanders that came out of Streets New Capenna. I think definitely the most impactful set this year for CDH in this regard. First up, we have a Jetmir, which is a Hate Bears stacks commander. The more creatures you have, it pumps up your creatures. It gives them a bunch of keyword abilities. I know that Ian piloted this deck to a high finish in a notable tournament this year. Apologies that I can't remember exactly this one, but Jetmir came out of the gate strong. It's a Naya deck. Did some cool stuff.
It gave those who played stacks creature strategies a way to actually close out the game in very short fashion.
Yeah, kind of very
Play a couple
reminiscent
of
of
yeah,
very reminiscent of Winota, where it's a commander that incidentally gives you like a good reason to play Hate Bears because you can still close out the game.
yeah, and in very, very strong ways too. It wasn't uncommon to get tacked for 20 or 30 by turn 4 with Jetmir. It's very strong, and a lot of people don't pay attention to it because like, oh, all does it do is buff. I don't care about that. And then you're like, you're hitting me for what now? I only
Oh,
have a land horror elves over
all my
here.
guys are 5/2s
Yeah,
with vigilance
exactly.
and lifelink, and I forget what other
First
random
strike,
keyword.
maybe.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
was just it just buffs them
They
uncontrollably.
probably get double strike eventually.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, man. Yeah, well, shows you how much I know.
Exactly. So, and that deck is something that's fell off a little bit off the radar. I think since Ian stopped plugging it as much, I would love to see people pick that deck back up personally. But then, of course, we also have Rocco Cabretti Caterer, which is a very popular deck that more and more people have been picking up. It is just pay X and you get to tutor a creature of X out of your deck and put it onto the battlefield. A lot of people, very often when you're casting Rocco, you're winning the game, but it also just gives you so many flexible options. This has been probably, I think, the top performing new CEDH deck of 2022 would be Rocco.
I'd probably say that. And the thing about Rocco that's so great is that you could build him about 1,000 different ways. And so Rocco is so far from solved that people are still trying it out. Some people are playing like Godo Helm in it. Like, why win by counting to 11 when you can win by counting to 14 instead? Oh,
I'm
and play
I,
good cards.
I'm
That too.
you, but better meme.
Yeah, exactly. Um, but Rocco, a lot of things that allow Rocco to function is just the fact that it's a toolbox. You want to play a stack strategy with Rocco, you can do that. You want to play a turbo strategy with Rocco, you can do that. You want to play a mid-range strategy with Rocco, you can do that. And it's because you basically have any one of those creatures in the command zone at any given point in time. And that's super powerful with Rocco.
And then there was also Falco Spara, Pact Weaver, which is Bant. It's a flying trample bird demon, and it lets you look at the top card of your library at any time. You can cast stuff from the top of your library by removing a counter. I think this is a card that people were messing around with, and then pretty quickly realized it's probably like the weakest of these different three color new commanders that we're talking about. But people have been trying to make it work. People love looking at the top of their library and trying to cast spells from it. I just don't know if Falco Spara is the best commander for that.
It's pretty good. I'm not gonna lie, because things like Mana Gorger Hydra being put in there, so every spell you get the counter back to then counter it. Really good synergies that don't allow you to play certain things normally that you can play. Glenelindra Archmage, you remove the -1/-1 counter and still be able to counter stuff. Um, Falco Spara, I'm not going to say is the next big thing to beat and is a super top tier commander, but I think it filled a gap for those mid rangey type people who really love that kind of stuff, that like to really control the board and like to overwhelm people with advantage, that got kind of tired of Tim Thrasios. Not Jetmir, I'm sorry. Falco Spara might be the one to look into because it allows you to do a lot of really fun stuff, a lot of game actions. If game actions are your thing, then Falco Spara is definitely a good one.
Ryan, that's very fair. Give Falco Sparrow a try, see if it's for you, see if it's not. It's another one that probably could just use a little more work from people. We'll talk about that later, Ryan. We'll talk about that later.
Sure, sure.
Another commander from the set that kind of came hot out of the gate and I think got left behind a little bit for one reason or another is Rafine, Scheming Seer, a 3-drop 1/4 with flying in Ward 1. And whenever you attack, target creature connives X, where X is the number of attacking creatures. And then, of course, connive is you'll draw X cards, discard X cards, and then put a +1/+1 counter on that creature for each non-land card discarded. So Rafine gives you the ability to very quickly draw through your deck very fast. Before you know it, you'll be drawing 3, 4, 5, 6 cards of card selection per attack step. And then, of course, that's also pumping up some guys very quickly because, you'll draw 5 cards, discard, maybe 2 or 3 non-lands, and then that guy gets 3 +1/+1 counters. And this is an Esper deck, white, blue, and black. So just by colors alone, you get to play a lot of colorful and powerful cards. Colorful cards. So many colorful cards to play in Magic the Gathering, Ryan. You get to play a lot of powerful cards just in those colors alone. And then incidentally, you get a cool commander that offers you a lot of card selection. I think this is also something that was just kind of left behind after a while. People realized, maybe there's something a little bit better to be doing than just trying to connive for every attack step. Maybe my commander should be doing a little more for me than that.
Yeah, the people are sleeping on Rafine, in my opinion. I think that the fact that you can basically connive 5, that's crazy good. Like, I know it's not card advantage, it's card selection, and we won't get into the nuance or the semantics of that. But I'm sorry, that's really, really good to be able to pick the 5 best cards out of your hand in the top 5 of your deck. That's really a recipe for success, in my opinion. And I think that people didn't really see the value of it because CDH kind of gets the tunnel vision sometimes. They're like, well, how does this win for me? How does this do this for me? And I think Rafine will come around. I think it's just going to take a little more time. I believe a lot of the 60 card formats have really latched onto Rafine. They've seen the power of Rafine, and it's doing pretty well, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that. I'm not an expert in 60 card formats. So
Little did Ryan know, no 60 card player has ever
not
heard
a
of the
single
card
60
Rafine
card
Scheming
format
Seer.
played Rafine. It's a 50-cent card.
And then, of course, keep it moving. There is perhaps I said that Rocco has been like the most consistently successful. I think that's true. And then there's the Streets of New Capenna commander with a major tournament win under its belt. Tivit, Sealer of Secrets, another Esper card. This one costs 6. It has flying in Ward 3, so it's probably never going to be removed. It's also a flying 6/6, so you can just kill people in a few swings if you want to. And then when it enters the battlefield or deals combat damage to a player, you will essentially make 3 clues and a treasure token due to the way that he works. And then, of course, that is very good with the card Time Sieve, which lets you sacrifice 4 artifacts to take
5.
an extra turn.
5.
Oh, sorry, 5. Oh, yes, and Tivit will end up with 5 artifacts, not 4.
It creates 5 artifacts every time it connects, and Time Sieve requires you to sacrifice 5 artifacts. And you get to take basically as many turns as you are able to connect and still create 5.
Yep.
There are little caveats to that because, like, if you start to eliminate players, you don't get as many votes anymore. But that has, like, I don't think that I've ever seen that actually come up. The game is pretty much just over when you're taking those turns.
Yeah, it's not technically infinite turns, but you get to take like 20 turns pretty much, and figure out how to win a CDH game in 20 draw steps. Or maybe you shouldn't be playing the CDH deck.
And the thing about Tivit is when you first saw Tivit, it felt like a battle cruiser deck. And so I think a lot of CDH players disregarded it. They're like, man, Ward
it costs
3.
6.
It costs 6?
Costs 6. Oh, I get 3 clue tokens every attack step. Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, but like, that's not worth it. And you're like, oh, wait. It's actually really good because you can play your Thassa's Oracle package with it, play your Time Sieve combo with it. You can do a lot of really good stuff. And Ward 3 basically means it's not getting removed. I mean, I'm sorry, but paying 4 for Swords to Plowshares feels super bad. It feels so bad. And you'll do it because Tivit is absolutely bonkers. But at the same time, they'll just counter it or something. It's just, that thing should have never had Ward 3. I'm sorry. I just shouldn't have never had Ward 3 on it. I apologize. I get so angry when I see that stupid Ward 3 on there.
Yeah, the ward on a lot of different creatures was definitely something they were experimenting with a lot this year. There's a lot of random legendary creatures that have Ward 1, Ward 2, Ward 3, Ward discard a card or what have you. Definitely something they've put into their tool bag this year, and I personally hope they put away.
Yeah, I hope they put that away forever. I don't like it. And it's like, well, it's not quite hexproof, so there's a way around it. Be like, get out of my face with that. It's basically hexproof. When you got Ward 3 on there, you want me to just completely tempo the bejesus out of myself by taking my 1 mana value removal spell and turning it into a worse murder. It's horrible. I hate it. Anyway.
Yep, exactly. I agree, Ryan. Moving past the commanders from Streets of New Capenna, now that we're a third of the way talking through the second set of the year, we have a card that I know I am a lot lower on than a lot of people, but that has broken into most blue X CDH decks this year. That is Ledger Shredder. It's a 2-cost 1/3 with flying. And whenever a player, so including yourself, casts their second spell of the turn, it connives, which, as we just mentioned a few minutes ago, that's you draw a card, you discard a card, and if you discard a non-land card this way, the creature conniving will get a +1/+1 counter. So a lot of people like to call this card Baby Crom. You put it onto the battlefield. It's already a 1/3 for 2. And then as people cast their second spell, you start to get to draw cards. And before you know it, a Ledger Shredder can very commonly grow into a 3/4, a 4/5, a 5/6, because people aren't that scared of jamming cards into Ledger Shredder or jamming cards into Crom. They're kind of just like, whatever, I have to cast my spells. You can have that effect. Um, I personally think it's like an okay card that a lot of decks should be a bit more careful about considering whether or not they want to include this fine 2 CMC advantage engine on a creature that also can become a beater if your opponents play suboptimally, rather than maybe playing another 1 CMC counterspell or another creature that may actually be more in the line of what you want to play in your specific deck or whatnot. I think it's a fine card, but I don't think that Ledger Shredder should be as what it is right now, which is pretty much everyone playing blue has shoved Ledger Shredder into their CDH deck. I don't know what you think about that, though, Ryan.
I agree with you. I think that everyone was shoving Ledger Shredder into their deck, and people are starting to remove it. They're starting to see, which I think is super interesting because everyone saw, oh, hey, Rafine, all it does is connive. And they're like, oh, hey, Ledger Shredder, it connives. And it's like, no, that's the same effect. I know, but like, and people, I think that Ledger Shredder definitely has a home in CEDH. I don't think it's an auto include in every CEDH deck. And it's because, like you said, it connives, which is card selection, and I still stand behind that, like I did with Rafine. But it doesn't. It's not card advantage like Crom. So, and it does. It is every player, including yourself. So you cast Ledger Shredder, then you cast a Lotus Petal, you get to connive. It's your second spell, and so that's super powerful. And it's only a 2-drop, which is also really nice. And it gets really big really fast, like surprisingly so. And they're like, it's how big now? What? You can block my Crom with it? What? Like that's super powerful too. It fuels breach, which is super nice. But if we're not talking about things like that, it's fine. I this would not be as high as I think it should be, and I think we're starting to see that surface. Some people swear life and death by Ledger Shredder, and other people are finally saying it was the most mediocre out of my blue cards this round and stuff. I wish I had something else most of the time.
Yeah, I think I wanted to mention something about both this card and also the next card we're going to talk about, Professional Facebreaker. I think that in my mind, they're kind of almost fall prey to their CMC and when you want to play them in the game in relation to their effect. So much the same as Crom, you want to get Crom out in turn 1, turn 2 in a lot of games because the early turns are when people are going to be double spelling a lot because they're going to be trying to set up. I can't imagine very many CDH games or very many decks where I actually am aiming to cast Ledger Shredder at the time in the game when it is best.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot of games where I'm gonna say, "Ooh, turn 2 Ledger Shredder is what this hand does." That sounds great. Top deck a Ledger Shredder on turn 5. That's not feeling so good anymore. And so I think it has an incidental. I think people almost like fail in comparing it to Crom because one of the reasons why Crom is so good is because you always have it. I don't see decks playing Crom in the 99, right? Because it's a lot worse if you don't have Jeweled Lotus. That's different entirely. But like its effect is so good because you can have it like turn 2. I'm going to play my Crom. Come on, set up, draw me cards because I just spent all my cards on setting up. Give me more cards. Let me hit you for 4 before you've really set up, et cetera, et cetera. Ledger Shredder, I think, kind of falls into this trap where you don't want to cast it on turn 2, but that's also when the card is best, is if you have it on the battlefield on turn 2. So it's kind of, I also think maybe people can trick themselves into casting it when they're not supposed to for much the same reason. But that's a bit of my diatribe on Ledger Shredder. If you have it in your deck, consider when you want to cast it, when you would want to cast it, and if like that scenario ever actually comes up when it's like most ideal.
I think if you're Grixis Breach, I think you should run Ledger
Oh,
Shredder,
for
unless
sure.
there's
Yeah.
like a polymorph reason why you shouldn't or something like that. If you're in Grixis Breach, I think Ledger Shredder's great. Timna Thrasios, Ledger Shredder? Not so much. There's better things in Timna Thrasios than Ledger Shredder.
Yep,
Because
for sure,
you
for
already
sure.
have Thrasios for your card selection anyway. You know, we could go on comparisons for days
Yeah,
though.
exactly. I could talk about Ledger Shredder and this next card all day long. So let's get to the next card. Professional Facebreaker. 3 CMC red card with Menace. Slaps people around. And whenever a creature you control deals damage to a player, one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you get to create a treasure token. So it is limited in much the same way as Timna. So it is worded such that you can only get one treasure token per opponent that you hit per
Mm-hmm.
combat step. And then it has an activated ability itself of sacrifice a treasure token, exile the top card of your library. You can play it this turn, only this turn. This is another card that got picked up into a lot of decks, kind of almost like all of these red decks, if they were ever going to incidentally hit their opponent, kind of vacuumed up this card. We're like, oh yeah, this is great. This is awesome. It's card selection. It ramps me and that kind of stuff. And I did the same thing in Teamer Pirates. I was like, I love having treasure around. I need more card draw or card selection because I don't have it out of the command zone. Boom, easy include. And then it's a fun card. I know a lot of people, it's another card, much like a Letter Shredder. A lot of people have auto included this card, put it up to that status. I have personally found this card out of very specific decks to be quite wanting. It's harder than ever to hit your opponents with creatures, as more and more creatures have gotten better and more people are coming up the board. Harder than ever to hit people with creatures. Casting a 3 CMC creature that doesn't immediately like super impact the game is actually a really big ask. There's a lot of 3 CMC cards out there that are putting you in charge of the table and that kind of stuff. And Professional Facebreaker is a little bit like, oh, in next turn, this is gonna really ramp me up to 6 mana, I guess, and I can look at the top card of my library and only play it this turn. If I really need to accidentally reveal my Thoracle at the wrong time. Um, that's a bad example. That's just a risk you have to take every time. But this is another card that I'm a lot lower on than a lot of people. It's another card that I really think that people should evaluate whether they should play it or not. Should it be a Najila? Like, probably. I'm not a Najila expert, but is it a fine? Is it a great card in Prosper? Once again, sure. Did I cut it from Teamer Pirates after realizing after like 10 games that it rotted away in my hand, never being the thing I wanted to do ever? Yeah. I don't know what you think though, Ryan.
I think that in Timna decks, it has a spot. That's really what it boils down to. If you're playing Timna, if you're in the red color identity, I think Facebreaker could have a spot for you because you're wanting to connect with people. So you're already on that train, and it gives you the extra ability to do things like the mana advantage. So you're already getting the card advantage from Timna. Getting the mana advantage from Facebreaker is also really good. Now, do I want to cast a Timna turn 3 or a Facebreaker turn 3? I'd probably want the Timna. I'm fine with doing the Facebreaker turn 4. However, it just depends on the circumstance, of course. But if I'm not in a Timna deck, I'm kind of not really wanting Facebreaker unless there's other synergies I have. Like, for example, Facebreaker is good in Magda because Magda generates a ton of treasures and Magda wants to turn its dwarves sideways. So it's already got like, anywhere between 3 and 10 treasures. So you're telling me that if something's about to happen, I can exile 10 cards of my library and play them this turn? That's pretty powerful. But like you said, it's not an auto include in every deck that runs red. And that's just what Magic players, not CDH players, not EDH players, Magic players are just notorious for over evaluating the ceiling of something and underestimating what the floor is. And that's what Facebreaker fell victim to, just like Ledger Shredder fell victim to it. I love Facebreaker, but I don't put it in every deck that I have that has red. Like, for example, Godo Bandit Warlord. Everyone knows that it's my deck. I love it. I don't run Facebreaker in that because I need to use the combat step in order to get the treasures from it. So it's useless. I think that Facebreaker is kind of like Ragavan. everyone was just, oh my God, best card ever printed. I mean, literally articles that said that best card ever printed. And they were like, Ragavan absolutely goes in every single deck with red and CEDH. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. That's a really bad idea. And Facebreaker's kind of getting that same thing. Well, it gets a treasure and gets you card advantage. It goes both. And it's like, if, like you said, if the board is gunked up and you can't connect, I know it has menace, but if you can't connect with it effectively, it's 3 CMC to do some stuff.
Do nothing.
Yeah. So not an auto include, but a good card. I do think it's a good card, especially in Temna decks.
Ryan, that is very fair. Thank you for a more measured professional Facebreaker take than my own.
That's the only one you get. You only get one measured answer from me. Everything else is just horrible trash spewing from my mouth.
My professional Facebreaker feelings align a lot with Drake. A while ago, I tweeted out, I think from the Playing with Power account, I was like, here's my one negative tweet of this year. What was your least favorite new card this year? And Drake said professional Facebreaker, because I wasted so much time convincing myself that it was playable in my decks and trying to make it work.
Yep. That's a really good way to put it. Yep.
And then probably like the best and most widely played and should be most widely played card from Streets of New Capenna. Moving on, we've got an Offer You Can't Refuse. This is an instant that reads counter target non-creature spell. Its controller creates 2 treasure tokens and it costs a singular blue mana. A lot of people are put off on this card because it gives your opponents 2 treasures. My opponents can have 2 mana if they're not winning the game.
There was never a point when I didn't want to cast this card, ever, even if they were winning. Even in a post ad nos, somebody tries to do something, I'll offer it.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. Just take that. And this is like kind of a bad line of reasoning, but it's because it's not always ideal. But this is a great like first counter in a counter spell war, right? I'm going to use an Offer You Can't Refuse because it's cheap, and if you counter this spell, then you're not going to get the 2 treasures. So like, counter this, please, and then I'll counter your counter, kind of thing, or I'll counter your original spell again, type of beat. So I really like that. I don't know if there's much to say about an Offer You Can't Refuse, except that people have picked it up, people have jammed it, people have found it to be quite good, and I always love a new 1 CMC counter spell that I can play.
There was a couple things about Offer that I thought was interesting throughout this year, was that everyone was like, oh man, that downside's so huge. I don't know if this is worth running. And everyone was just so wishy-washy on it. And the problem is that it actually was worth it. Because this isn't Spell Pierce, where it's like, hey, I have infinite mana. I'm going to counter my something. Be like, ooh, Spell Pierce is just dead in this hand. This is just hard counter non-creature spell. Everything from planeswalkers to artifacts to anything that just didn't have a creature on it, you could counter it. That's really powerful. It's more powerful than Swan Song. Swan Song only hits 3 things. Like, you can't counter planeswalkers or anything with it. Like, and Offer is super, super good. And everyone was very wishy-washy in it because they thought, well, I don't want to give my opponents 2 treasures. They might cast a something with it. Be like, yeah, but you also counted their like ad nauseum. Who cares? It's like, it's fine. And eventually anybody who's dissenting on that idea just kind of looked at it through the year and said, wow, this actually was good. There was hardly ever a point when I didn't want to use that spell. And it's a very, very, very good counter. And some people are like, well, maybe it's not an auto occlude. I would almost disagree. I think it goes in just about every blue deck that involves counters. I think it's just so powerful. Hard counter any non-creature spell. So good.
Ryan, so fair. I agree. Now, let's move on. Now that we've talked about the first 2 sets of the year for almost an hour, Ryan, we're on a roll. Okay. But these are the most 2 important. But we did want to mention 2 more kind of role player cards from Streets of New Capenna that have come up. The first one is Vivian on the Hunt. It is a 6 CMC planeswalker that, with its plus ability, it is a birthing pot effect. You get to sacrifice a creature, search your library for a creature card with mana value equal to +1, and put it onto the battlefield. A lot of decks have been able to use this to great effect. Always love another birthing pot effect.
Yeah, it's a second birthing pot in your deck.
And then the other one was Unlicensed Hearse. Hasn't been picked up as much, but it's a 2 CMC vehicle that lets you exile 2 target cards from a single graveyard. A few decks have picked this up kind of as another flexible type of graveyard hate piece that won't blow up their own graveyard. It gets really big really fast because its power and toughness are equal to the number of cards exiled with it. So it's a 2/2, then it's a 4/4, then it's a 6/6, then it's an 8/8. So, in those really long games, maybe you can kill somebody with an unlicensed hearse. Any more comments on Streets of New Capenna, Ryan, before we
Nope.
move on to the next set? All right.
That pretty much covered it. It only took us a billion years to cover 2 sets. But to be fair,
they're very
we covered these
ones.
because they were so impactful to the CEDH meta. And as you kind of realize as we talk a little bit more, and we'll get to it, don't want to spoil it too much, but the rest of the sets of the year weren't super impactful on CEDH. That's why we kind of covered so much, because there was a lot of stuff that really became part of what the CEDH core is.
Exactly, Brian. Moving on to the next set. Speaking of a set that impacted CEDH a lot less than people might have hoped, Commander Legends Baldur's Gate. Obviously, for people who have been invested in CEDH for a while, we all remember when the original Commander Legends came out. The original Commander Legends set is still probably one of the single most impactful sets on CEDH as a whole. Just like in the history of CEDH, I don't know if you could name like a normal premium set that's been more impactful, except for like, you could say like ABUR, right? Like,
sure.
I guess we just play the duels, right? And some other stuff. But Jeweled Lotus, monocolor partners, lots of sick spells that are played in like 1 to 4 CEDH decks, lots of awesome reprints that brought down and made a lot of iconic commander cards more impactful and not more impactful, more accessible to CEDH players. Commander Legends Baldur's Gate, not as much. There was a lot of really cool reprints in it that didn't get lauded as much as I think it should have. All the battle lands got brought down from being like $15 to $25 to being like $2 to $6. Still,
huge.
Battle lands must play in pretty much any CEDH deck. Those have been brought down big time. Jessica's Will was reprinted in the precons that brought down the price of that spell a good bit. Grim Hireling, same thing. It went down from like $25 to like $4. Savine's Reclamation, about to get reprinted again in Dominaria Remastered, which is cool. But that was also a spell that was like above $10, now is below $10. Always love to see that. But as far as like the new cards that came out in Battle for Baldur's Gate, a lot different than the original. They did the whole choose a background thing rather than going with partners, which I'm always split on. I would love to see just like tons of partners, so that like partner is like more of a ubiquitous thing. We already have it. The chicken's out of the coop, the cat's out of the bag, whatever one of those boomer
whatever
phrases,
caged up animal analogy you want to use.
Yeah, exactly. The tiger's out of the cage,
the pen.
Yeah. But maybe we should just have a lot more partners at this point. I would love that personally, but I get why they don't want to make any more. So instead, we did partners. I have not seen a single choose a background pair make an impact on CEDH.
Some people try to make some stuff work. Abdel Adrian, Gorian's Ward plus Candlekeep Sage. We saw how often that did not do anything. That was it was once again Azorius, and we already kind of talked about that briefly with Shorekai. But that was like the closest we came, and that says a lot. That says a lot. That's the closest we really came to a CEDH deck. And I'm sure there's people that are rumbling out there, well, what about X plus X is really good? I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it on Twitter. I haven't seen it on YouTube. I haven't seen it in my local meta. I haven't seen it in our Discord. I haven't seen rumblings of it anywhere.
I know. I know some people tried to make Gale plus Scion of, I forget the word, work. I know like a few people like Hire and Rebel were pretty hype about it for like 2 weeks, and they're like, "This is sweet," and then they jammed it, and they're like, I should just be playing like Roger Silas instead.
You got it. That's exactly right.
If this is the kind of like turbo ad-nos plan I'm going for, yeah, exactly.
Yes, strictly worse.
So moving on, there are a few cards in this set. There's Archivist of Ogma, which is a flash creature that whenever an opponent searches a library, you get to draw a card and gain a life. That was another one of those cards that kind of went through the cycle of people were hype about it, then people got down on it, and now it's kind of trending up again. People have kind of been discovering that actually they do like this card.
I think Archivist of Ogma is fine. It's middle of the road. I don't think it deserved the hype that it got, like Ledger Shredder and stuff like that, and Facebreaker. I think it's like one of those cards, not an auto include in any deck with white, but a card that's probably worth including in some decks. I play it in my Timna Jessica Mad Farm deck, and some people say I shouldn't even play it there. But I love the card advantage that it can give me, especially when people don't respect it. It's one of those cards where its quality is directly related to your opponents, and that can be a very, very negative thing, especially if you have very responsible opponents or you're in a bad matchup where just no one's searching and you're just like, this is a 2 CMC card that does nothing. This is horrible.
Yep, exactly. Moving on past that one, there's of course Displacer Kitten, which is like the one new actual win con that we got in CDH this year. I don't think it's like the best in the world. I think it's pretty slick. So there's plenty of different Displacer Kitten loops that you can do to eventually win the game. It's a 4 CMC card that it flickers stuff. You know what else is there to know about Displacer Kitten, Ryan?
It's Paradox Kitten. It's such a good card, except for it's not a good card in every single deck like Paradox Engine was. This is the one new strategy that came out this year. One. Everything else, just we didn't get any new major win cons. We kind of got the B of an A plus B, like with Tivit, for example, Tivit Time Sieve. But like, this was the one thing that was kind of the ubiquitous, not, in the command zone kind of thing that you can use to win a game. Anybody that has a Planeswalker based deck like Tevish Zot really loved Kitten because you could flicker it, create more thralls, and flicker it, and then draw 2 cards, and other things like Joy Rub, where you're casting your artifacts and flickering Kitten for an additional mana to keep storming off. Kitten is really, really good. And it was the one thing in that, it was the one like new strategy, if you will, that people were focusing their decks around. Oh, so-and-so Breach, or, so-and-so Naws, or, well, now there's so-and-so Kitten, which is nice to have a new strategy to use. New, it's going to wreck the format and turn everything on its head? No, of course not. And it's a good card. It's not the best card ever, but I liked that we at least had something this year to use. And of all things to have a something on, this was a really good card. It feels reminiscent of Paradox Engine. If anybody has ever played with it, it's so much fun to play with. I love it.
Ryan, I agree. I love new stuff. It's great to see new stuff. Now, speaking about less new stuff, we have another Pyroclasm effect. And of a type, it's Delayed Blast Fireball. This is a 3 CMC spell that deals 2 damage to each opponent and each creature they control. And if the spell was cast from exile, it deals 5 damage to each opponent and each creature they control instead. It has Foretell, so you can pay 2, exile it face down, and you can cast it later for its Foretell cost. Its Foretell cost is 6. So a lot of decks have been picking this card up, but usually decks that can exile it through other ways other than its Foretell cost, and then cast it for its normal cost and still get the exile effect. So pay 3, deal 5 damage to each of your opponent's creatures. That'll pretty much clean up any creature that people play in the format that isn't like Tidesplout Tyrant or Hullbreaker Horror, right? So people have been picking this one up. I don't know if there's really much else to say about it. I think it's a pretty slick card for the decks that love it, or the decks that can play it. I love Answers.
This card is trash. This card is the worst card that people have been evaluating. I am sorry. This card is garbage. You mean to tell me that pay 8 to clear the board is CEDH playable? This card is junk. This is such a junk card. Oh, but what about that one time where I used my confirmation bias to say how I totally won the game because of Delayed Blast Fireball? Be like, yeah, and tell me about all the times it was completely dead in your hand because you wanted to cast it for 3 for a Pyroclasm. It didn't even hit the Drannith Magistrate, so you couldn't foretell it to begin with because you can't cast from exile with a foretell cost. And it's just such a horrible card. I don't know why people are even considering this junk. It's so bad.
It's because they exile cards from their library. That's why.
Okay, I'm sorry. Prosper players. This pay 6 to deal something. Good job, Prosper players. Pay 6.
Hey, I cast it off Bring to Light, Ryan. Speaking of trash.
Wow. So pay 5.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
what I'm
Pay
saying.
five.
This is such a
I
junk
know. I
card.
know. I
I don't
totally
know
get it.
why people are so high on this card.
I have cut it from all of my lists. If you really want to know why you should play Delayed Blast Fireball, go talk to Greg. I don't have
Yeah,
the
talk to
answers, Ryan.
Greg at Curious Control on Twitter. Let him know that we sent them to you for him to justify why it's so good. I don't even think he's on it anymore, quite
I
frankly.
think he's back on Flame Sweep.
Okay, yeah, exactly. Flame Sweep. It's a bad card. Like the floor to ceiling evaluations. We're gonna stop talking about it. It's just bad. That's
Exactly. Ryan, you wanted me to write down Black Market Connections. Tell me about Black Market
a
Connections.
little bit more edge or niche case scenario. Those who want to grind mid-rangey stuff, and it can utilize a lot of stuff. So you mean to tell me I can draw a card and get a treasure every turn from Black Market Connections? It's pretty good. There's also a creature on it too. So if you do anything with sacking shenanigans or you do stuff with Temna, that's not bad. Does it belong in every deck? Absolutely not. It is a little bit more edge case, and we do see it skewed towards the casual. But I am seeing certain lists like Abzan lists and stuff like that really using it, and you're really seeing the power of it. And I think people slept on this card a lot simply because they said, "Oh, that's a casual card. That's not very good. That's a what do they call that? Phyrexian Arena. You have to wait a whole turn and this, that, and the other." I get that, and all of those points are actually valid. I agree. There are some decks that might want to use it though, especially if you want to utilize all three, because some of those effects are really, really powerful. I think just the treasure and card alone are actually really good. Not an auto include in black decks. I'm not saying that, but I think some decks might want to explore it, and maybe it's good, maybe it's not.
Very fair, Ryan. All right. I wanted to make a quick shout out to the set Double Masters 2. It was a big reprint set this summer. Obviously, no new cards. There was a lot of great CDH reprints in it that I think a lot of people wish would have been in Baldur's Gate. Oops. But, of course, the two most notable, Dockside Extortionist being reprinted for the first time since its original printing in Commander 2019. I think the price went down from I think it was 2019. I don't recall.
No, it was
Yeah,
2019.
yeah,
You're
yeah.
right.
I think the price went from like $70 to like $50, but hey, that's like 30% off. So,
And everyone who wanted their bling or foil fix could get that. People who didn't like the
yep,
original art can look at this new art. That was cool too.
for sure, for sure. And then of course, probably the most monetarily impactful reprint was Imperial Seal. Imperial Seal finally reprinted for the first time since its
Ever.
Judge promo. It's
Oh,
six
my
hundred
bad. Judge
dollar Judge
promo. My
promo.
bad.
Yeah,
My bad.
exactly. So now you can get an Imperial Seal for I believe under $100. If you want bling, that's not the Judge promo. You can get that too. I think it might have even settled in around $70 for a normal Imperial Seal. Definitely not a cheap card, but way, way, way cheaper than Portal 3 Kingdoms or Judge promo Imperial Seals would run down.
Yeah, you want to pay $1,000 or $1,600, now go to and get it for $70. And this reprinting tanked the other ones too, which I was super happy to see because it was just growing completely out of control. And now you can get a Judge promo of it for like $400, which is a Judge promo, so it's a little bit more in alignment with it. And the Portal 3 Kingdoms version, I don't even know what you get those for now. Like I
I
think
think it stayed still relatively high because like people just like to collect stuff like that. But
it is P3K, and so I get that. But people stop buying the P3K one, which means that more are going to enter the market and less are going to leave it. So 100% super happy to see this printed finally.
I certainly agree, Ryan. Great to have those cards. Moving past Double Masters, we go to the last two sets of the year, which have an interesting combination of factors. Both of these sets were definitely weaker in ways that CDH cares about. And additionally, both of these sets, we have not had as much time to digest them because they're both relatively new. They're by far the two newest sets. We're talking about Dominaria United and then the Brothers War. We wrote down a few different things from each of them. Dominaria United, there was the Painlands reprint. The Painlands will always creep up to a couple bucks. Always nice to bring those down to being like two.
And some of them were getting really expensive, actually. Some of them were getting $10+ range. It was crazy how
Love
high
to
they
see
were
it.
hitting.
Love to see him come
Yeah, so
down.
love to see it. These are your budget options if you don't want to necessarily put a duel in yet, just or anything like that, or you need that last land for your Tainted Pact mana base. It's nice to not have to pay $10-$20 for it. You can pay two for it instead.
Yep. And then, of course, the two most impactful cards we've seen come out of this set are both like hyper deck specific. So I'm just going to mention them both real quick. There's Phoenix Chick, which is a 1-drop 1/1 that has been fine in Winota. It's another non-human that just gets down on the battlefield in turn one. I'm not even sure if all the Winota decks are playing it, but I know a lot of people are hyped about it. And then out of the commander decks, there's Activated Sleeper, which is a card which enters the battlefield as a copy of a card that of yours that died this turn. Specifically, very good in Protein Hulk because it itself has 0 power, so it's like kind of free to get off of Protein Hulk. You go and get Grand Abolisher plus that card plus like another piece. You have your Grand Abolisher in play. Nobody can impact you anymore. You have to have a sacrifice effect on the battlefield that you can then use to sacrifice your new Protein Hulk Activated Sleeper again, and then like go and get your pile that actually wins you the game. But now you have Grand Abolisher on the battlefield. Cool.
Yeah, it's good for Hulk lines because you can get Viscera Seer, Activated Sleeper, and Grand Abolisher. I believe that's correct.
That
And
works.
then
Yep.
you have your outlets for the rest of it, and you get the lockout because there's Protean Hulk lines have kind of had that one point of vulnerability. So you like Pattern of Rebirth, and you get Hulk onto the battlefield. And there's that kind of that one spot where people can kind of interact with you. This allows you to kind of cut that off. So basically, now the only time you have is really when you like Pattern of Rebirth it or you Birthing Pod it away or something like that. That's the only time you can interact now with Activated Sleeper.
Yep. Exactly. And there's the other cards of this set that micro improvements to decks, stuff that people are trying it out. I'm sure we'll have more to talk about this set like 6 months from now.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Brothers War. We're technically talking about this set. It's basically brand new in the grand scheme of things. So we don't know. We have some cards that people are excited about right now that people are trying. Ryan, tell us about Soul Partition.
So Soul Partition, I think, is one of the bigger hits coming out of it, and that kind of says a lot about Brothers War. That's the big hit. It's a really great card because it's very versatile. Soul Partition is 1 and a white for an instant. Says exile target non-land permanent for as long as it remains exiled. Its owner may play it. A spell cast by an opponent this way costs 2 more to cast. All right, so a couple of things about Soul Partition that I think is very good. Number 1, it's an instant removal spell. Number 2, it allows you to play offensively as well as defensively. So it says a spell cast by an opponent this way costs 2 more to cast. You can exile your Dockside for 2 and cast it for 2. So you don't cast it for 4, you cast it for 2. And you can also do things defensively. Oh, there's a Drannith Magistrate on the board that's stopping 3 players, and stopping myself. I'll Soul Partition it. I'll be able to get around it, and then that person can recast it for 4 if they want to put it back on the battlefield, which is really, really nice. So if you get stopped or whatever, the game isn't over, you didn't quote unquote hand it to the next player, they can still kind of recoup. And so it's just a really good card for those types of things. It's non-land permanent, exile target non-land permanent. So it's anything that isn't a land, which there's a lot of those different types of things in our format. We just talked about Hulk, exile Protean Hulk. And if they want to get it, they're going to have to pay like 9 for it. Sure, go ahead at that point. But exile their Underworld Breach or exile this or that or the other. Now they're going to get really tempoed hard if they want to recast their Underworld Breach for 4 when they're already kind of choked on their mana to begin with, usually in the beginning of a breach line. And this will help that kind of stuff. I really like Soul Partition a lot in decks that run white. I'm not saying it's an auto include, but I am saying that it should be pretty highly evaluated, especially when you're talking about trying to remove certain things or trying to go for a line that is more turbo and you include white in your deck for that. I think this is a really good card.
Thanks for expounding upon that, Ryan. Next up, we've got a card I'm just going to mention really fast. It's Calamity's Wake. It's it's a graveyard exile effect stapled together with a silence effect. It's a little bit expensive. It isn't instant, so people have been trying this card out. We'll see how it goes. There's also Brotherhood's End. Speaking of perhaps unplayable, but perhaps really good Pyroclasm adjacent effects, this is a 3 CMC sorcery that gives you the option of either dealing 3 damage to all players and all creatures and all planeswalkers, or destroying all artifacts that cost 3 CMC or less. A lot of people have been kind of putting that in the Pyroclasm-ish spot. Maybe blow up all of your opponent's rocks. Why not? Clean up a lot of creatures at 3 toughness. That does kill Drannith Magistrate, unlike effects that do 2 damage. And
Blade
then
Blast Fireball. That's a horrible card.
And then, of course, there's Myrel Sheila of Argive. I think that's how you pronounce that.
Argive.
Sure, sorry. Yeah. It's another Grand Abolisher effect. So people, like during your turn, people can't cast spells, people can't activate their abilities and whatnot. And also, it happens to make a bunch of artifact soldiers, which can be relevant for some decks. Some people are high on this card. Ryan is not. We'll see how it shakes out.
Yeah, I'd rather just have Grand Abolisher.
Anything else that you want to say about that's all the sets. That's all the sets, Ryan. We've gone through all the sets.
I'll talk briefly about Calamity's Wake. Calamity's Wake, I think people are going to instinctually put into their decks. I don't think that's correct. I think it's good in some decks, not most decks. Like, this isn't Soul Partition. This is, hey, I'm in maybe Naya colors and I have creature combos. I want to stop my breach opponents or something like that. Or I'm trying to go off this turn and all I have are creature combos. So this is not an auto include in every single deck, especially since it says all players. It is symmetrical. So it hits everyone, including yourself. So now you can't stop counter wars and stuff yourself. So don't automatically put Calamity's Wake in every deck. I just think it does belong in some, like Rocco, for example. Rocco's a good one because it does mainly creature-based combos. This is a really good card for that kind of deck.
All right. That has been this year in cards. A lot of sets. Obviously, 2 of the sets we talked about this time around impacted CEDH a lot more. We've had a lot of time to mess around with those sets, mess around with those cards. It's been a great time. So, we were going to talk a lot more about CEDH this year, but we ran long. We like to talk. We're good at talking, especially Ryan. He knows how to run that. He knows how to run that mouth. So, but we'll have to get to that in our next episode. But for that one, this wraps it up for this episode of the podcast. Tune in next time when we talk more about our favorite format and our favorite game, Magic the Gathering. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.